Hi everybody, welcome back to Painting with Daniel. I'm your host Daniel Tate from the Longview Public Library. This is episode 2 and we're going to start our first painting today. If you missed episode 1, I went over watercolor materials, basic watercolor techniques, and we also worked on sketching out our first image to use for today's painting. So feel free to check out the YouTube channel where this video is and you'll find episode 1 there. And you can watch that or get a refresher if you need it. But today we're going to use that sketch that we made in episode 1 to start our watercolor painting together. So let's dive right into it.
All right, so we are going to get started with our painting here. I put some notes down here. These are good general tips for watercolor painting. So we have general to specific right here, and that's a reminder that you don't want to, or you don't need to worry about details from the start. You're going to want to put things in generally to start, so big blocks of color. Don't worry about the details or the specifics. We will work our way towards those. So we're always going to work general to specific, and that may make things look a little funny at first, a little goofy. That's okay. This is a process. We will get to those details and those specifics. And then we have light to dark. So that's very specific and important with watercolor, is that you want to put down the light colors, work with things so that you're not putting in dark pigment, dark colors in. Don't worry about those to start. We will work our way towards that. And that's because once we start putting down darker colors onto our watercolor painting, we can't go back from that. We can always make things darker working that way. So if they start off light, you can always make it darker. But if it starts off dark, you can't really go back from that. So we're going to work from light to dark. And I have my cool water here and my watercolor paints. I'm gonna open these up. And so I'm going into my water here, getting my brush nice and wet. And then I'm going to make, normally I wouldn't put my watercolors this close to my painting in case I splash, but just so you can see what I'm doing, I'm going to move it into the camera here. So the brush is nice and wet. And to make a gray, I'm going to take some of what I've already got here and just kind of scramble it all together. If you're working from a totally clean palette or a totally clean pan of watercolors, you won't have anything, but you can make gray just by taking browns. So I'm going in this brown here, and I do a lot of this kind of twirling in my watercolors, and then pick that over here. So putting brown down, going into my watercolor, or my water container here, cleaning out my brush. And then I'm going to go into green. I like greens and browns to make a gray. It's not going to be an exact match of this necessarily, but that's okay. So I'm going to take this I've mixed up, and I'm going to put that all in this background here to match that. I've covered everything essentially except for the hand and the flowers, whether it's the petals or the stems. So I'm going to let this dry out some, and then I will come back to it and keep going from there. So I gave this about an hour to dry, and we can see that some of that work that I did, adding in darker pigment here and making those lines, a lot of that is totally out the window at this point. That's totally fine. A lot of times with watercolor, you go in with good intentions and see how it turns out as things dry and what it looks like later. For me, that's a lot of the fun of watercolor, is seeing how it reacts and seeing what it does later on, and becoming okay with things transforming on you, changing, and being open to making different decisions based on what it looks like later and improvising some. This also is still a little bit puffy. The paper hasn't totally flattened down, but it isn't tacky. It's pretty much dry, so we can keep going. And we will continue with this general to specific here. And now that I've blocked that in or painted that, I'm going to add some color to these areas here. I'm going to add the lightest color, so it'll be kind of a pinkish tan for this hand. I'm not going to worry about making it, or I'm not going to focus on making it dark or adding in any of these features with light and shadow or the knuckles or anything like that. I'm just going to be putting in a solid color to start those layers. Same for the green here, and same for the different colors of petals. And you can tell with, when I paint this in, that light green is about the light of the green here on this petal. So it's not the darker sections at all, it's this lighter green. So we can go back in later on in the painting and make that darker. So I'm going to continue painting in these stems here. And down here at the bottom, go ahead and get a little green on that. Oop, and that got into my hand. So when that happens, don't panic. Just go into your water here. And that happened because my hand was still wet. So that just picked up all of that watercolor in there. Now I'm just going back into my clean water, and then I can just wipe that up. No problem. Because these are so close together, this green right here next to that hand, that might start to mingle some while this is still wet, because we're not letting it dry in between each one of these sections. So that's something you'll have to get comfortable with as you explore watercolor, of letting things dry before you take it step by step. So something to keep in mind if you really want to control and keep areas separated from one another as you paint. You can just paint an area, take a break, let it dry, come back, paint the next area, and you won't get this kind of bleeding or mixing on these edges here. All right, so we have the hand painted in, we have the stems and these leaves, everything's light to dark. Now we want to move on to the petals and the different flowers up here. I'm going to do the lightest ones first, and then do and work my way to this red one, since this is darker. Yellow is the weakest color, which means that it accepts other colors very easily. It gets overwhelmed easily. So let's do yellow first. Go in, clean out my brush again. So we will let this area dry, and then we will come back to it. And I think I might, in the next video, I might start to work in some of this background a little bit more, some of these darker areas, especially where it's blurry, and then we might take some of that and add in those stripes a little bit more. So we're going to let this dry and then get back to it. And we are back. I have let my painting dry more. It is pretty much flat down. It is not tacky at all. This is all dry, and I've also cleaned my palette here. So we're going to start from scratch. And I have all these nicely blocked in now. You can see with this red flower, there's this, what I like in watercolors, there's this nice blossom right here of the color, this kind of line traveling here. Just something that adds a little flair, I think, when you're working with watercolor. And now let's go ahead and go in here with this background a little more. Things are nice and light. We are bringing those colors in, getting darker with them, but we are working light to dark. So let's keep going with the background here. This, and so I'm going to get this brush nice and wet, and I'm going to follow this so these kind of fade out here, but there are still some light areas. There's almost these light stripes, especially over here, so I'm just going to kind of use that as my guide. Watch this flower and pull this in here. So we'll let this dry, and then we will come in and do a little bit more with the hand and the flowers. And because I painted around this orange, we still don't quite yet want to pop that orange in, but I might start introducing this orange flower here in the back because there's a little bit of orange in this more yellow flower, so I might use the same orange here as I do in there. But we will jump into that after we let this dry. So I'm going to work with this brush this time. And again, I've dumped out my old water and have clean, cool water in there. So I'm ready to go. And we're still working general to specific, light to dark. So we don't have to get any of these darker colors in here, these shadows, things like that. We don't have to focus on that right now. Let's pop in that orange flower. So back here, that orange flower right there. Okay, and then I'm going to pop in some of these. You can see these orange spots here on this yellow flower, so I'll just go in and kind of pop that in. And I'm not worried about this being a perfect copy of that. I'm really just referencing it and adding these slashes of color in there. All right. And going back into my water here. Now I'm going to, since this hand is behind or underneath these leaves, I'm going to start painting that in first. And I'm going to be working with, I can take some of this yellow here, but it's going to be kind of an orangey pinky color. Again, it's not so much about trying to match those colors exactly. This is a guide for us. So you can change up your hand to be whatever colors you want. And we're still going light to dark, so I'm not going to get into those shadows too much. Starting to show those highlights, so that first layer that we put in has become those highlights. And I like to paint things looser. You could really go in and describe, depending on how many layers you want to do and how long you want to work on pieces, you can really get into describing everything that you see. So whether it's that physical structure of a hand, those shadows, you can even see, the vein right here a little bit, and those are the kind of details. It's up to you if you want to describe things that much. So similar to that, we're going to work on the flower now. something I like to do, a little trick, is when I start to add these darker colors in, and I know I'm going to go darker with these lines here. This is the darkest parts of our image here are these lines, about these 3 lines, and then those shadows in the flowers. So for fun, this is gonna sound a little wild, but I'm gonna put some of that green in here right now, and up here too. So why I'm doing this is because this is going to be darker eventually, I'm going to paint over that. I'll probably come in with a dark purple or something, but I'm putting in some green here, and that's just going to play with, it'll very subtly, it's going to play with these flowers. And again, because I'm not going to use a flat black color, allows those to bounce around some. So I'm just going to put this in here now. You can see my hand here has picked up some of that green because I didn't wait for these sections to dry. That's okay. If I want, I can just wet my brush, assuming this water is, and this water's still fairly clean. I can do that same thing of just getting it wet and kind of pushing it around. And that even spreads that green in this hand a little bit, and I don't mind that. I like that. We're going to use darker paint on here. Eventually, we're probably going to come in with some browns, so that's going to cover that up. So I'm going to keep that in mind as I'm working on it. I might, while these dry, I can start playing around with things. While this is wet up here, I'm just going to come in and blur that too. But I'm starting to notice that these lighter stripes in here, they're too light. These, the difference between these dark and light stripes over here, or lines, these still have different tones in them. They're not flat color like this. So that's something that I'm going to need to start working on and bringing. There's even almost a little bit of texture here. So I need to start muting those, adding some of this on there. I might not do that right now, but I will need to do that because that's, right now it's flattening that a little too much. And just from quick observation here, they're lighter up here and then lighter down here. So I need to start thinking about muting them in those different sections. I'm going to let this dry because I've got a lot of paint on here now. And then we'll come back to it. And at this point, we're what I refer to as kind of massaging things, where we've addressed the entire painting now with paint, with color, and now it's about just working things in, working in those details, working in darker colors, bolder colors, and thinking about texture and those specific parts. So if general to specific and light to dark is a spectrum, so if we're working light to dark, general to specific, we're starting to travel down this road here. So we're starting to get more specific and we're starting to add in more darks. So after this dries and we work on it some more, we're going to get much closer to wrapping things up for this painting. All right, let's start getting into some of these details, into these specifics and these darks. And I'm going to go into the flowers here. I'm going to start with this red flower, and I'm going to make kind of a bold, more opaque, so less water, and I'm also using a pretty small brush for this. Now I'm going to go into that hand and add some of where the shadow exists. I'm going to add some brown. And mix it here. I think I'm going to add a little blue to it, just to cool that down. And then use my water to make it thin, make it more transparent, and then follow where the shadows are. All right, I'm going to let that dry now, and then we'll come in and we'll work some of this background, and then we'll do some final touches inside the hand here and inside these flowers. Now that this part is dry, let's go ahead and perk up this background a little bit. We're going to add some of that texture and just add some of those darker colors in there. So I'm going to switch to this brush, so a little bit bigger of a brush. I'm going to mix up another gray, so let's go for that violet red. And then let's add some green in there. I'm going to let that dry some. And after that, we'll go back in and we'll enhance all of the darks throughout here, and then we should be pretty close to finished. Now that this is all dry again, let's add some darks in. So we are down on this end of the spectrum, working with our darks and working with more specific details in here. And let's see if we can finish this painting up. I'm going to add some darks into this flower now, and those little dots in there, I'm going to try and pop in a few of those, and then I will add some shadows to this hand, and we will be all finished. So I've mixed this green and this red here, give me this dark olive, and that's what I'm going to use to just add these little dots in here just to give it a little flavor. And then I can water this down, same color here, and maybe try and give these, just brush that in there, give it a little more form. Kind of in between these petal marks. And then I might, under here, darken this up a little bit and kind of define these stems a little bit more. All right. Finally, let's go and just, with a couple of these, that a little bit of a shadow. Let it stand out a little bit more. And then let's get a dark brown, dark kind of peachy brown, and let's add some final shadows into this hand down here. So once this all dries, we can take this tape off and we will have our first painting.
Awesome job, everybody. Thanks for joining me again this week. Here is my finished watercolor painting. With your own, feel free to go in with pencil, color pencil, crayons, add details, add textures, add your own flair and touches. Really make it your own painting and have fun with it. I hope you join me next week on Thursday, where we are going to work on a landscape watercolor together. This has been Painting with Daniel, and you have been painting with Daniel.